The cat was the first thing I noticed, a tabby with a torn ear, pressed flat against the side of a dumpster while two men blocked the alley entrance behind me. I'd only cut through to avoid the rain. That was my mistake. The larger one took a step forward, his boots scraping the wet concrete. "Wrong shortcut, sweetheart," he said, and the other one laughed like it was something they'd rehearsed. I pressed back against the brick wall, arms tightening around my guitar case, the one thing I hadn't pawned, the one thing I'd carried through 4 cities and 11 months of nothing going right. The strap bit into my shoulder. The cat didn't move. Neither did I. Then, headlights swept across the mouth of the alley. A truck, dark blue, idled at the curb. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He wasn't big in an intimidating way. He was just steady. The kind of steady that makes loud people suddenly unsure of themselves. He didn't say much. Just looked at them, then at me, then back at them. "She's with me." His voice was flat and certain, like a door closing. "They left. Not fast, but they left." He turned to me. No dramatic scan up and down, no look of pity, just a question. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head. "You got somewhere to be tonight?" I almost laughed. "I'm working on it." He glanced at the cat, who had crept out from behind the dumpster and was now winding around my ankles. "What about him?" "I don't know him." He crouched down, let the cat sniff his hand. "Looks like he's decided otherwise." He stood back up. "There's a diner 2 blocks over. It's dry, come get coffee. You don't have to talk." I didn't know why I followed him, maybe because he hadn't tried to touch me. Maybe because the rain was getting worse and I had $43 to my name and nowhere to sleep that night that didn't involve a bus station bench. Maybe because the cat followed him too, and I figured that meant something. His name was Noah. Noah Callahan. He said it the same way, he said everything like it wasn't a big deal. We sat in a corner booth at a place called Patty's that smelled like coffee and old maple syrup. The cat curled under the table. The waitress didn't say a word about it. Noah ordered 2 coffees and a plate of eggs without asking me, which should have bothered me but didn't, because by then I was shaking from the cold and too tired to make decisions. I told him my name was Maya. He nodded. "You passing through?" he asked. I was supposed to be. He didn't push, he just drank his coffee and let me eat half his eggs, which I pretended not to be grateful for. When the check came, he paid it before I could argue. Then he set his keys on the table, not toward me, just between us. "I have a property outside town, old farmhouse. The main barn's been converted, it's where I work, but there's a small apartment above the garage. Separate entrance, separate everything. It's empty." He paused. "You can stay there tonight. Or more than tonight, if you need it." I stared at him. "You don't know me. I know you didn't run when those men showed up. And I know you're carrying a guitar in the rain instead of selling it." He tilted his head slightly. "That tells me something." I should have said no. Every sensible instinct I had was built for exactly this moment. The moment someone offers something too good, and you're supposed to recognize the trap. But I looked at his hands around the coffee mug, at the calluses and the smear of sawdust on his forearm, at the way he hadn't once looked at me like I owed him anything, and I said yes. The drive out was quiet. The cat, who I'd started calling Finn in my head, sat between us on the bench seat like he'd been doing it for years. The apartment above the garage was small and clean. A bed, a kitchenette, a window that looked out over the field behind the barn. He showed me where the thermostat was, left a spare key on the counter, and told me there was food in the mini fridge. "Lock it from inside," he said from the doorway. "I'll be in the barn most mornings if you need anything." I nodded. He nodded. And then he left, and I stood in a room that wasn't mine, holding a guitar case and a cat I hadn't planned on keeping, and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was clenched. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before I cried. Not from sadness, from the sheer weight of someone being decent when you'd almost stopped believing people were. I hadn't planned on staying more than a week. That was the thing about decent places, they make you remember what you were running from. And my story wasn't short. I grew up in Tucson with my mother and her revolving door of half-finished plans. She was talented, genuinely, a songwriter who'd gotten close once, an album that almost got picked up when I was 6, a producer who'd strung her along for 3 years and left her with nothing but a recording bill she spent the rest of my childhood paying off. After that, she stopped writing. She started drinking instead. Not dramatically, not the kind that made the news. Just quietly, a little more each year, until she was someone who looked like my mother but made different decisions than she used to. Music was the thing she gave me before all that. Guitar at 8, theory at 10. By 15, I was good enough to play weddings on weekends. By 18, I was good enough to think I could actually do something with it. Her boyfriend at the time, a man named Gerald who wore his confidence like a coat 2 sizes too big, had opinions about that. He thought music was a hobby, not a plan. He liked to say this at dinner, specifically at dinner, when I couldn't leave without it being a scene. I got a partial scholarship to a music program in Nashville and left without much fanfare. My mother hugged me at the bus station and whispered, "Don't come back broke." It wasn't cruel, exactly. It was just the kind of thing she said. Nashville was harder than I'd expected and easier than it had any right to be. I found my people, other musicians, living in shared houses with too many guitars and not enough sleep. I wrote songs in the back corner of coffee shops and played open mics and believed, the way only young people can, that the breakthrough was just around the corner. For a while, it almost was. A producer named Derek took interest in my work when I was 22. We spent 8 months writing together, and I really thought that was it. That the album was real, that the deal was coming. What was actually coming was that Derek had submitted 3 of my songs under a different name and was in the process of signing a deal that didn't involve me at all. I found out on a Wednesday. By Thursday, I'd cleared out my share of the apartment. By Friday, I was on a bus to Atlanta to stay with a friend from college who had a couch and a tolerant roommate. By the following spring, the friend had moved in with her boyfriend and the couch had run out, and I was back to moving. I was good at moving. I was good at fitting my life into a single bag and a guitar case and finding the next soft place to land. What I wasn't good at was staying, which was how I'd spent 3 years cycling through cities, short-term gigs, sublets, and the particular loneliness of always being new somewhere. I was in Harlan, a small town in eastern Kentucky, because I'd heard there was a residency program for songwriters at a community arts center. I'd applied, gotten a maybe, and driven out on the last of a paycheck from a wedding gig in Lexington. The maybe had turned into a no 2 days before I arrived. The wedding money had covered the bus but not a room. And that's how I ended up in an alley in the rain with a cat and a stranger named Noah. He didn't ask me any of this right away, he let me have the week without questions. I found out what he did by accident. The barn doors were open one afternoon when I came back from a walk, and I stopped at the threshold without meaning to. The space inside had been gutted and rebuilt into a workshop, half-finished furniture at every stage of completion. A dining table with legs like river branches. Chairs with backs carved into gentle waves. A rocking chair near the window that looked like something out of a dream. He was at the workbench with his back to me, planing a board in long, slow strokes. He didn't notice me at first. I watched for a moment the way he moved, careful and deliberate, like each pass of the plane mattered, and then Finn walked in ahead of me and announced us both. Noah turned around. He didn't look embarrassed to be caught. "Come in if you want." I did. I walked slowly along the wall, looking at the pieces. "You made all of these?" "Some are orders. Some are just things I wanted to make." I stopped in front of the rocking chair. "This one? That one's not for sale." I looked at him, he looked at the chair. Neither of us said anything else about it. But after that, the distance between us got a little shorter. He started leaving the barn doors open most mornings. I started making coffee for 2 without being asked. We ate lunch on the back steps, sometimes him with sawdust on his forearms, me with Finn on my lap, and talked about small things. The weather. The field behind the barn where he'd planted sunflowers the previous spring. The open mic at a bar in town I'd been thinking about sitting in on. "You should," he said once, about the open mic. Maybe. I've heard you playing up there in the evenings. He nodded toward the garage apartment. You're good. I looked down at my coffee. I used to think so. He didn't push. He never pushed. But 3 days later, I found a flyer for the open mic slid under my door, no note attached. I went. I played 2 songs, original, the first time I'd played originals in front of people in almost 2 years. The response was quiet but real, the kind of silence that means people are listening, not the kind that means they've stopped. A woman came up to me afterward and said my second song had made her cry in a good way, and I stood there holding my guitar and felt something shift. When I got home, Noah was still up, light on in the barn. I knocked on the doorframe. How'd it go? He asked, without turning around. Good. I think it went good. He set down his tool and looked at me then, a small smile at the corner of his mouth. Told you. That was the night I stopped counting the days until I left. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a car that cost more than most people's annual salary. I was in the small garden beside the garage, trying to coax some basil out of a pot, when the silver sedan pulled up to the main house. A woman got out polished, precise, the kind of put together that doesn't happen by accident. She scanned the property with a look that managed to be curious and dismissive at the same time, then walked to the barn. I stayed where I was. It wasn't my business. Except that the barn doors were open and the property was small, and voices carry. You can't just collect strays, Noah. Her tone was smooth but had edges. People talk. You made a special trip to tell me that? His voice was even. Your parents are worried. Your mother called me, actually. She thinks you're isolating. My mother calls everyone. She said you haven't been home since February. A pause. And now there's some woman living in your garage with a cat. I'm just saying it looks. How it looks is my problem. The evenness had gone cooler, she has a name. And she's not a stray. She works. Doing what, exactly? Silence. Noah. Her voice softened in a way that felt strategic. I know you take things in. Broken birds. Old houses. You can't fix everyone. I'm not trying to fix anyone. Another pause, longer. Just be careful, she said finally, and I could hear the sound of heels on concrete, moving away. I stayed crouched by the basil pot long after the silver car drove off. The word she hadn't said sat in my chest anyway. Charity. That's what she'd meant. That I was a project. That my being here was about him, not me, a broken bird. That night, I made dinner, left a plate in the kitchen the way I sometimes did when we were both around, and then went upstairs and didn't come back down. The next morning, Noah knocked before I'd finished my first coffee. She's gone, he said, when I opened the door. Not hello, not good morning, just that. I heard some of it, I kept my voice level. She's not wrong, you know. I don't have a real reason to be here anymore. I'm not just a person you owe a favor. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, looking at the field behind me. Why does there have to be a reason? Because there always is. He looked at me then. Who told you that? I didn't answer, because the answer was everyone, and saying that out loud would require a conversation I wasn't ready to have. Her name is Christine, he said. We dated for about 2 years, ended a year and a half ago. Badly. He paused. She has opinions about my life that she hasn't been invited to keep having. I looked at him. Is she right that you take in broken things? The corner of his mouth moved, but not quite into a smile. I take in things I think have value, that's different. I didn't say anything. Stay, he said. Simple, the same way he said everything. Not because I need someone in the garage, because I'd like you to. I stayed. 3 weeks after Christine's visit, Noah knocked on my door on a Sunday evening with a look I hadn't seen on him before. He was holding a mug but not drinking from it, which meant he was thinking. My parents, he started. They're coming next weekend. Okay. It's complicated. He set the mug on the railing. My dad has had 2 cardiac events in the past year. My mom manages his stress like it's a second job. And they've been He stopped. They worry about me. About the fact that I'm out here alone and not, as my mother puts it, building a life. I waited. She called last week. She mentioned Christine, which means she heard from Christine, which means he exhaled. I told her things were different now. That there was someone. He said the last part, looking at the field, not at me. The air felt very still. Did you tell her who? I said carefully. I said her name was Maya. That she was someone I trusted. That she made the house feel less empty. Noah. I know. He turned to look at me then. I know what I'm asking. I know it's not fair. But my dad can't spend this visit worried about me. The last time he got stressed, he ended up in the hospital for 4 days. He paused. I'm asking if you would be willing to be introduced as someone I'm seeing. Not engaged, not anything formal, just present. Like you matter here. I looked at him. Don't I already? Something moved in his expression. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. And after they leave? I asked. After they leave, it's whatever you want it to be. I thought about the open mic, and the basil in the pot, and the way he'd slid that flyer under my door without a note. I thought about Finn asleep on the bench in the workshop like he'd always lived there. I thought about what Christine had said, broken bird, and how I hadn't packed the bag. Okay, I said. He let out a slow breath. Okay. I pointed at the mug on the railing. Your coffee's going cold. He almost smiled. He picked it up and went back to the barn, and I stood in the doorway for a moment after he'd gone, feeling the strange weight of something beginning. His parents arrived on a Saturday morning in a truck almost identical to Noah's, which made me smile before I'd even met them. His mother was small and precise, and looked at me with bright, careful eyes, the kind that are always reading more than you think. His father was quiet and broad-shouldered, walking more slowly than his body suggested he was used to, with a hand resting on his wife's arm that seemed equal parts habit and reassurance. Noah introduced me simply. Mom, Dad, this is Maya. She's important to me. His mother's whole face changed. Not dramatically, not the kind of change you could pin down and describe, but warmth came into it in a way that made me feel suddenly self-conscious, like she was seeing something I hadn't meant to show. She hugged me. Really hugged me, her arms firm and brief and certain, the way someone does when they're not performing a hug but actually giving one. He needs someone who'll tell him when he's being ridiculous, she said in my ear. I laughed, surprised. I'm still working up to that. His father shook my hand and held it a moment longer than a regular handshake. You play? He nodded toward the guitar case leaning by the barn door. I do. Good, he said, simply, like that settled something. The weekend had its own rhythm. We cooked together. His mother knew her way around a kitchen like a general knows terrain, and I followed her lead, learning things without being taught. His father sat in the barn with Noah for most of Saturday, and I could hear them talking, low voices and occasional laughter, the sound of two people relearning each other's company. That evening, we ate on the back porch. The conversation moved easy, the way it does with people who've stopped needing to impress each other. I played after dinner, just a few songs, sitting on the porch steps with the last of the light coming over the field, and when I finished, his mother was quiet for a moment. That second one, she said. Did you write it? Yes. Write more of those. I looked at her. I mean it, she said. That's the kind of song that makes people feel less alone. I managed to say thank you before I had to look away. Later, when his parents were inside, Noah and I sat on the porch steps in the dark. Finn was somewhere in the grass, doing his nighttime investigations. You're good with them, he said. They make it easy. He was quiet for a moment. My dad pulled me aside this afternoon. He said Noah stopped. He said it was the first time in years he hadn't worried about me. I looked at him. He said you had kind eyes. He said it to his hands, not to me. He said whatever I'd found here, don't let it go. The field was dark and the fireflies had started. I didn't say anything, and neither did he, and the silence between us was the kind that doesn't need filling. Before they left Sunday afternoon, his mother pressed something into my hands. A small wooden box, old and smooth, with a clasp made of bone. This was my grandmother's, she said. I'd been carrying it in my bag for 6 years, not knowing who it was for. She closed my hands around it. Now I know. I held it all the way back to the apartment after they drove away. I sat on the bed with it in my lap and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened, a family that hadn't questioned me, hadn't measured me, hadn't made me prove I deserved to be in the room. I thought about my mother at the bus station, don't come back broke. I thought about Gerald at the dinner table, his opinions delivered like weather. I thought about Derek and the songs he'd taken. And I thought about how the people in this family had looked at me like I was simply here. Like that was enough. I set the box on the window ledge and watched it catch the last of the afternoon light, and I didn't let myself cry, but it was close. The week after his parents left was quiet in a way that had an undercurrent to it. Noah was in the barn longer than usual, and I spent more time in the apartment writing than I had in months. Pages of lyrics, whole verses coming in one sitting. The kind of flow that doesn't show up when you're only surviving. I thought we'd find our way back to normal. I thought the arrangement we'd made would dissolve the way it was supposed to, a performance with a clear ending, and we'd go back to coffee on the steps and open barn doors and the comfortable distance that had been the lever and 0%. Working just fine. What actually happened was that nothing went back to the way it had been. It went somewhere else instead. I noticed the change in small ways. The way he'd pause at the door of the apartment instead of just passing by. The way he'd started asking at the end of the day, genuinely asking, how the writing was going. The way he'd stopped avoiding my eyes when I said something that landed unexpectedly. I noticed the change in myself too, which was harder to manage. I'd been here 3 months. I'd stopped keeping a running calculation of bus routes in the back of my mind. I'd planted a second pot of basil and a small tray of strawberries on the window ledge. Finn had claimed the barn as joint territory, which Noah allowed without comment. My guitar lived in the corner of the workshop some evenings, not because I'd moved it there permanently, but because I kept forgetting to bring it back upstairs. These were the things I was thinking about the morning I overheard the phone call. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was walking across the yard with Finn at my heels, and the barn door was open, and Noah was near the back with his phone to his ear, not trying to hide the conversation but not expecting an audience either. The voice on the other end was Christine's. I could tell from the way his posture changed. I stopped outside the door. She's not a distraction, Christine. Steady. No heat in it. She's... He paused. She's the reason the house doesn't feel like a waiting room anymore. Silence. I'm not asking for your read on this. Another pause. Because it's not your business, not anymore. He hung up. I should have walked back to the apartment. I should have pretended I hadn't heard any of it. Instead, I stood there for a moment with Finn winding around my ankles, and then I turned and walked inside and went straight to my room and sat on the edge of the bed with my hands in my lap. He'd said it to Christine, not to me. Which maybe made it more honest. I sat there for a long time. Long enough for the light to shift. Long enough for Finn to give up waiting and fall asleep against my leg. And then I picked up my guitar and wrote the best song I'd written in 4 years. I wrote it in one sitting, from the first line to the last, and when I finished, I was sitting on the floor without remembering moving there, and I knew, without being able to explain how, that something in me had decided. That night I went to the barn. He was sanding a cabinet by lamplight, back to the door. I stood at the threshold, heart doing something complicated. Can I ask you something? He set down the sandpaper and turned around. That thing you said. I kept my voice even. That the house doesn't feel like a waiting room anymore. I watched his face. Did you mean it, or was that for her benefit? He looked at me for a long moment. Who told you I said that? Your door was open. He exhaled. Not frustrated, more like relieved to be past a particular point. He crossed his arms. I meant it. I nodded once. Maya. He said my name differently than he usually did. Not casual. Deliberate. I asked you to pretend because I didn't want to say the real version out loud yet. Because saying it out loud meant it became something that could end badly, and he stopped. I've had things end badly. So have I. I know. Then you know why I need it to be real before I stay for it. He looked at me directly, the way he rarely did, that particular attention he gave to things he was deciding were worth keeping. It's real, he said. It's been real for longer than I've known what to do with it. I walked across the barn, through the smell of sawdust and lamp oil, and I took his hand in both of mine because I didn't trust words right then to carry the weight. He didn't say anything either. He just held on. 6 months later, the garage apartment was still technically mine, but I spent most of it in name only. My clothes were in 2 closets. My guitar was almost always in the barn. The second toothbrush by the sink had become such a normal sight that neither of us mentioned it anymore. Finn slept on the end of the bed every night and looked personally offended on the rare occasions we moved him. Noah's parents came every 6 weeks or so, and each time his mother brought something: a jar of peach preserves, a knitted throw she'd been finishing, once a wooden spoon carved by his father with a small sunflower on the handle because she'd told him I grew them now in the bed by the barn. His father's health had steadied. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. His mother credited the visits, which she said gave them both something to look forward to. I had a song on a small indie label's radar, not a deal, not yet, but a conversation that was continuing. The woman from the open mic had turned out to know someone who knew someone, and she'd passed along a recording I'd made on my phone in the apartment. And now, there were emails with professionals in them, and I was still not quite sure how to feel about that, which was its own kind of progress from the years I'd spent being crushed by the not knowing. One morning in October, I was on the back porch with coffee when Noah came out of the barn carrying the rocking chair. The one he'd said wasn't for sale. He set it beside the chair I was already in and sat down without a word. I looked at it. Then at him. I thought that one wasn't for sale. It isn't. Then why? I made it for here. He looked at the field, the sunflowers browning at the edges now, the last light gold in the seed-heavy heads. I made it a long time before you got here. I just didn't know who it was for yet. I looked out at the field, too. Finn was somewhere in the grass, invisible but occasionally rustling. I stopped running, I said, not for the first time, but for the first time out loud to him. He reached over and took my hand without looking, the way he'd started to do, easy and sure, like it wasn't a decision anymore, but just what his hand did now. I know, he said. We sat there until the coffee went cold, and neither of us minded. There are people who find their footing in the place they grew up, surrounded by the same walls and the same streets, and a life that built itself around them steadily, over time. I used to think I'd missed that. That the years of moving and losing and starting over had cost me something permanent, some foundation I'd never get back. But sitting on that porch in Kentucky, with a hand-carved chair and a cat in the sunflowers and a man who'd looked at a broken-down stranger in a rainy alley and seen something worth stopping for, I understood, finally, that you don't always find home the way you expect to. Sometimes it finds you in the middle of a shortcut that turned out to be the right road after all.